Okay, great. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you met 5 people, at least you said hello to, because that's good. Right, our next speaker is going to reach us over Zoom. He's in Switzerland for the moment. His name is Robert. And who is Robert? Well, let me tell you. Good question. Robert is a professor at the Swiss Business School. It's a big, do we have a photo of him? Yes, he's there. It's a big week for Robert, actually. For the past couple of, let's say, 6 or 8 months, he's been working on a new book called PMO Principles and PMO Service Principles around PMO. And the book is just released this week on Amazon, so he's very proud of this. He's also founder of an organization called AIPMO, which is an organization set up for project management officers, so to promote PMOs around the world. He's also a very, very sportive guy. He's done lots of different things. I've just picked out, I remember rock climbing he's done hang gliding. And he also told me that he's done something, I thought he was joking with me at the beginning. He says he has done tandem mountain biking. So I said, okay, there's no way I believe that. So I asked him to send me a picture of what a tandem mountain bike looked like, and he went down to the garage and he took a picture of his own bike. So I don't have it here, but he promised me that he would share it as his second slide and show you what it is. And he's also mentioned there's another bike actually with 3 seats as well. I don't know if he's going to show the picture of that or not. At the age of 50, he had a midlife crisis, or a late midlife crisis, so he had to choose between a car and a PhD. And he said because he had more questions than answers, he decided to go for the PhD, and that's what he's done. And because we're focused on public projects at the moment, he's actually worked on one of the biggest, or he is actually working on one of the biggest public projects which is done around the world today, if not the biggest, and that's the Nemo City project, which is taking place in Saudi Arabia. You can see lots of videos on YouTube on this, and he's giving advice to all the PMOs. So his title of his talk today is Increasing Public Sector Success Rates. Rates, yes. So now his slides will be shown here, and we will meet him for the Q&A. Because he has to get dressed, I think, yet. So, but we'll see his slides coming up on the stage. So, Robert, can you say hello to us? Can you give us your votes for Belgium? Huh? You hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Good afternoon.
Right. Good.
Sorry I can't be with you. I did actually sort of come a little earlier and sort of watching you in the presentation, so I hope everything is going great together. So I was going to show you some photographs of the tandem and the trandem. Tandem is with 2 seats, trandem is with 3. And I don't really have that much time because unfortunately I have about 10 minutes is taken out of the agenda. But just to say actually that I enjoy pushing the limits. Sometimes it's not necessarily appreciated within companies, but it is if you actually do research, and it's all about pushing limits. And with the tandem, I actually had it specially built from the gentleman in England that actually makes racing tandem bikes around the world. And I raced in the Swiss Bike Masters a couple of times, and we actually came third. And it was about 3,000 kilometers, 3 kilometers altitude climb, 3,000 meters, and 25 kilometers. So it took about 7 hours to go and do. So really I had to be physically fit. And when you're going down a mountain at 80 miles an hour, no joking, you need to make sure everything works. It was a highly customized bike. And that's the thing about methodologies on projects, is that generic methodologies don't work. This is part of my PhD. So I actually did a PhD, a midlife crisis. Thank you, Frank, for that. And I think this is important for all of us when we go through our journeys, is actually being able to answer the questions. Otherwise, it's very frustrating going through life accordingly. And this is one of the things that I really enjoy looking at, is from different perspectives of, for example, on the PMO side or the project or the portfolio. In fact, I'll just move the slide on. I worked across different industries. I think this really goes in light with the breakthroughs of discovery. If you look at Thomas Kuhn's book of Scientific Revolutions, he actually states the people that do breakthroughs of the industry are not from within the industry, but from outside of it. And this is something that, for example, in NEOM, where I'm actually working, or I work on and off, I never worked in construction before, but I can actually bring my experience from all the other industries that I've worked in. I think that's really very important to have that perspective and to go and do that. So yes, I'm a professor at the Swiss Business School. I also used to run courses, summer courses for RS University. I don't have the time now anymore. I created a course called Consulting Frameworks because I used to work at McKinsey before and other consulting companies. And this is really very powerful if you can actually develop something, you frame the problem. And so this is how the consulting companies work. You create a hypothesis, and rather than boil the ocean, you work from that and try to disprove it. And if you can't disprove it, then probably that's actually where the problem is. I enjoy, I think in more my latter years, my early years was using my body, my latter years is using my brain. And so I've written several book chapters, about 4 books. The last one actually was this one we just published, PMO Principles and Service Principles. It's in the 2nd edition. This one took about 4 years to write. This one is about a year to write. Each book is between 1 to 3 years. And we have a series of books actually lined up that are just coming out. So just a little bit about myself. So for today, what I'd like to cover off is really the topic of PMOs, Project Management Office. And I think that PMOs have actually had a bit of a bad rap over the years because it's always taken second seat to projects and programs and portfolios. And something they may find interesting, actually, a portfolio is a type of PMO. In fact, when I was working in the Engineering Technical Standards Department, which is like a design office, that's actually a type of PMO as well. So it's not actually called a PMO, but it's a type of PMO. So the first thing is looking at why management know they need one, but they don't really know what a PMO is, and I'll explain why. Then a few facts and figures about PMOs. And then into failure rates, I'll cover that quickly because I think that's quite a worn topic or well-spoken topic. Then looking into complex project risk factors, and this is based on several research papers that have all sort of come together as one, and then actually apply that and map it to complex projects or mega projects. I mean, mega project is complex projects, some are mega. In fact, in part of my PhD, does mega need to be large? You could actually look at the genome, mapping the human genome. That's a mega project in itself. So looking at something very small, but the actual the scope of it and the depth of it has taken many years to go and do. And then I'll actually look at how you map PMO services to actually mitigate these project risks, and then actually describe what a PMO topology and a service topology. So these are terms probably new to you, and there's something that in AIPMO, through the research that we are doing, we have some of the top professors in the world in project management and PMO management. This is some of the work that's come out. We actually teach it. In fact, what we actually have developed is a research-driven standard or research-driven approach. So it's not based on people's personal views. It's actually based on research findings that come from different organizations. We actually put it into a framework. We develop that. We test it. Then we write it into books. And the 2 books you have just seen, these are the tail end of 7 years getting to this point, and we still have another 3 or 4 books to write. And then I'll actually look into or explain to you how you design a PMO topology and actually how you can reduce public sector failure rates. And this actually is a methodology that we've developed over the last 3 years, and it gives you a highlight overview of this, and then the questions and answers at the end. So that's what we want to look into. So this is the framework. I'm not going to explain all the details in it. The top half is really the strategy formulation. The lower half is the execution. So you've heard these terms before. And if you actually look at the influence of PMOs across the organization and just pretend this is the organization from a formulation and execution perspective, you'll see that PMOs exist everywhere. So really, there's some organizations say there's only just 3 types of PMOs. In reality, there's thousands of types of PMOs. You just have 4. If you have 4 services, you've got 16 combinations, and it all depends on how you do the categorization of it. And this is why the CEOs or senior management struggle to know what a PMO is. The book that we've written has over 230 services, and really no PMO will do 230. It actually adapts to the environment. PMOs don't mature; they adapt and they evolve. So they exist throughout the organization. They've got different service combinations, and they're an integral part. And in research, they talk about the embeddedness of a PMO and also the adapt and flex. And that's why we look at actually the concept of an impact factor, a PMO impact factor rather than a maturity factor. So how do we actually define a PMO? And actually, this is one of my areas of specializations is terminology, the meaning of the term, the evolution of the term, the etymology. So where does it come from? And actually how you sort of combine terms together. In fact, this is one of the projects I was working on, the mega project, in looking at terminology and how you actually put them together, the definitions, the metadata, and how they build into value trees or KPI trees. So we've actually defined a PMO as follows. It's an entity. We don't call it a function. It's like an entity operating either by itself or with other PMOs. And this is important because when you think about teams and teamwork versus working alone, a PMO is one team, but there's many other PMOs. And Monique Aubrey talked about PMOs that they're like bagels. They work with their clients very well, but they've got a hole in the middle. They don't work with each other. And this is what we're trying to actually address in actually ensuring that PMOs should work as a team in an organization, and they offer both mandated and non-mandated services. So PMOs have a compliance function. And there's lots of terms that we're not just going to discuss it today on all the terms, but the ones that are mandated are more the assurance side. The non-mandated are services such as that they're doing reporting, they've been asked to go and do it, or if it's been mandated, and then that becomes a mandated services, looking at scheduling aspects. It could be modeling, for example. It could do with stakeholder management. So as I say, in one of the books, we've described about 230 services, and they have responsibilities that relate to the delivery and management of those services. So we spent probably 2 years refining this term. We don't actually say they are supporting a project or they're driving a project. We try to be flexible in allowing a PMO to be agnostic of industry and actually what it does. And the services that they can actually do, and I described some before, this is like a description down here, but provide one or more services. It could be innovation, knowledge management, partnering, for example, strategic planning, etc., etc. So some facts about PMOs. If you see some of the reports, and we're going to come on to some examples, they talk about PMOs failing in a certain percentage. But really the question is, how many PMOs are there and how many people work in the PMO side? So we looked in LinkedIn, and LinkedIn's got about, I think, 800 million people in total, almost 1 billion people. And then we searched on the title of PMO across the top 12 countries. And we have this number here, almost 800,000 people. And you can see across in the USA, they've got over 300,000 people with a title. But what we don't know is people that do work in a PMO that don't have PMO in the title. So it's bound to be far more than actually 800,000 down here. So how many PMOs are there? Well, we don't really know. And how many PMOs actually exist that don't have the name of a PMO? We don't really know either. It's just really a question mark. So we don't know this information, but what we do know is that when you see reports that say 50% of PMOs fell within 2 years, if we don't know how many PMOs there are, how do they actually say there's actually 50%? In fact, what happened is that this information has been going around. It originally came out from a research paper from Monique Aubrey. The Gardner Group read it and then came up with this thing: 50% of PMOs fell within 2 years. The reality, the research paper had 18 PMOs, and they were from Sweden and Canada, and all 18 had succeeded. In fact, they used the term evolved. So how they have this information, I don't know. When I read into it, I was going to present it a keynote speaker in England, but I wasn't sure about this, and I talked to Monique, and it was a misunderstanding of the research paper. And so she actually wrote another paper she talked about a false paradigm. So the reality is that we don't know how many PMOs there are. You definitely can't get it from a paper with 18 PMOs from 2 developed countries. So you must be very careful actually what you listen to and all the facts that come out. The second one, so PMI talk about 3 types of PMOs: supportive, controlling, and directive. The problem with associations is that whatever they write, people almost believe word for word, and it becomes sort of embedded in their brains. Out of about 2,000 people we've certified in AIPMO, we haven't had one PMO that's able to map its services to these 3 types, not one at all. And in fact, being on the portfolio committee of PMI, I was involved with the portfolio version 4 of the standard. I write for AIPMO. I know the IPMA competency baseline 4 very well. And also I was at CCTA in England on the predecessor for Prince 2. And my methodology, my PhD was on methodologies. So the whole thing about methodologies and evolving, I know that very well. And also know that when you look at some of these things down here, you need to understand what's actually behind the research or what's behind the person's report. So there's literally thousands of types of PMOs, not 3 types. And the latest version of the PMBOK guide, they talk about 2. One is called a PMO, one's called a Value Management Office. The reality is just a name. It's just providing services that associate with projects that are classified as agile. However, what PMI has done is we issue the process part, and in that process part, they include 3 types of PMOs. So they're not consistent themselves as to PMOs. So our organization, AIPMO, specializes and focuses in that particular area. So moving on, so projects, why are they initiated? So this is actually called a competing values framework. What you have here is the private sector, public sector, by profit and dissatisfaction. And what's nice about categorization is that can you actually fill the 4 squares in? So most projects are for profit, private sector. But you also get dissatisfaction. So in the public sector, you hear many professors talk about projects being overrun, etc. So this is the example of the Gotthard Tunnel in Switzerland. It's the longest tunnel in the world. It was started because of all the traffic jams and all the trucks going across the Swiss Alps. But it's taken many years of planning, and they've implemented. It's actually live now, so all the trucks go across by train rather than rip up the roads or crash on their way, especially in the wintertime. This one's an interesting one. So you have dissatisfaction in private sector. So this is where you have the railways in the UK, and they privatized the actual rail on the top, but the infrastructure beneath it belongs to the government. And this one here is an interesting one, the public sector for profit. These are these glamorous projects, so such as the one I'm working on. In fact, I do teach here, and I've seen this being built, which is very impressive. So this is actually in Dubai, in the Marina area, and this actually started with absolutely nothing and took, I think, 5 or 6 years. In fact, one of the people that came on the course was the civil engineer responsible for building this thing. So progressing. So looking at some of the failure rates, you also must be also very careful about what failure is. If you ask the project manager, was your project a success or failure, they'll say a success. If you ask some of the stakeholders, they'll give you a different opinion. So this is from the public sector, and I just taken the report as it is. So looking at government projects, 18% of them have succeeded here, very low percentage. This is from another source talking about failure rates, so it's very similar. 84% have failed, 18% have succeeded. And then over here, if you look in New Zealand about government projects, the success rates are very low. And then if you look at some of these other comments down here, it shows or paints a depressing picture about project success rates. They're very low. Failure rates are very high. So this is research actually from Denko, Davis, and Cristales, professors from UCL in London. They spent several years looking at why mega projects fail. And what they've come up with is they took about 800 papers, reduced it down to 80 papers with high citations, and then they looked to see the main reasons. And what they sort of synthesized down to were these 6 areas down here. So these are risk factors for complex and future projects. So what we did in this was a webinar before, and I actually went through each stage of the plan of works and the construction projects and where these things will come into account. I've only got like about a few minutes left. Actually, I think it's about another 7 minutes. I'll just go quickly through. I looked specifically at public sector projects failing for the same reason. Map these points down here. These are some of the citations. So clearly it's not just for construction projects, but it's also civil service projects, IT projects, etc. So we all have the same problem. Then what I would have done is actually telling a story about the causality of risk on complex projects. It all starts with bias. So Ben Flyberg, Oxford professor, has written several papers on biases. In fact, when you read through it, he lists the top 10 biases that impact project management. So the first one is actually optimism bias. And invariably, this is from external consultants. And they come in, yes, we can go and do it. And it's always the yes, go-to attitude. So what happens then is that people are assigned in public sector to run a project. They may be a minister, but they're not really the project type of people, so they're challenged. And invariably, because it's not their money and it's big, they want to use some unproven technology. So, for example, Hyperloop it's great to actually consider it for a country, but it's not developed. Or, for example, flying cars and things like this, is that if you want to build a city of today, you have to have technology today. It's impossible to create the 22nd century city today because the technology is not invented. So what happens, they push the limits on this. The culture in the organization is more of an operational culture than a project culture, which is quite different. This actually impacts the people they take. You get ineffective management, and then because there's such big financial numbers, a lot of self-interest, people are getting high salaries. This also impacts the decision-making behavior. Then it comes to a point of the projects being too big to fail. They know it's not going to work, but they keep going thinking that they're actually going to succeed. So this is cognitive dissonance. Invariably impacts extrovert males where they think they're going to pull the project into a good shape. The reality is completely different. Then you have more and more problems, strategic misrepresentation. There's no transparency. And I know this myself for a fact on the mega project I'm working on, is that the departments that don't want to show you transparency, you have problems within them. They have a problem with the delivery model. This then goes into project leadership challenges, the people they go and take on, poor program management. Procurement turns transactional. And I know, being a vendor to the mega project I'm working on, it's extremely difficult when you're into it, and then you got to go out to a tender process that takes 3 months, and then they don't change the end dates. So everything starts to build up on the risks. They have problems with the suppliers, and then things actually get more and more complex, unnecessary complexity. You have necessary complexity, and then there's unnecessary complexity. When consultants are saying you're over complex, this is what they're referring to, unnecessary complexity. So this thing keeps building up to a point where you got the structures, you get escalations, schedules slip, and then you bring more consultants in, and then it goes into a reinforcing negative loop. So this is an example of a story, and this is a true story. In fact, when I presented this for some of the people who I know on these projects, they sort of smile at me saying, okay, yeah, I think we have that particular problem. So now let's look onto the PMO side. So these are these 6 areas, or the factors. And then what I've done is actually looking at a PMO topology, a team of PMOs positioned in the organization. So this is not typology, which means the characteristics of PMOs. It's topology, like a network topology. So you have to sort of believe me that because of time, is that when you take each one of these, if you offer a series of services down in the right combinations, you can actually either mitigate or actually sort of stop this thing happening. So whether it's a specific issue where the PMO is located, whether it's a systemic issue in the organization, or actually to do with the objectives of that particular sector, such as the mobility sector, the health sector, etc., PMOs have a very good positive impact if they're set up properly. The problem is that often people don't know how to set them up, and this is what we're trying to actually address. So if you look at now the services, this book is about 1,000 pages, 750 pages on A4, where we actually go through the whole methodology. And in fact, what we've described as 22 service domains. They're actually in the project world called disciplines. So just take, for example, governance. In the book, we actually describe the different groupings and services, and then we actually go into the whole governance design. So this is a governance area and how we go about it. And then it actually goes into why offer this service, what's the value, how do you actually measure it, hints and tips, etc. So this actually puts a structure to the PMOs. So since launching this book, we've sold already 200 copies, and this actually, every course we give, every case study we run, and every case study is real, a real case study solving a problem as part of the course. They use this book to actually accelerate the way they do their case studies. So what is a PMO topology and service topology? So I was actually describing it, but here's the definition. A structured network of PMOs that are depicted either physically or logically and shows the interconnections between them. So they could be embedded in the organization, or they could actually be an initiative-specific PMO, so it's not really embedded, it's just linked into the particular project itself. A service topology is actually a categorization of planned and actual services. So you have the service domain like financial management, you have beneath it certain groupings, and you have the services beneath that. So here you have, for example, financial management or stakeholder management or risk management. These names are very similar to what PMI would call them performance domains or knowledge areas. In fact, for the PMI people on the course, there actually is no definition of a performance domain. It's actually the same thing as a knowledge area. When I was on the core committee, I actually challenged them to say, what is a performance domain? It's actually the same thing as a knowledge area. In England, Axelis or PeopleCert now call them themes. So these are mapped together, the topology of the PMO, the service topology, and then these are actually delivered in projects and programs. So this is actually how it works. So if you look at a complex project, so this is actually the one I'm working on, but I've just generalized it. So you have the EPMO, whether it's called executive PMO or the enterprise PMO. It's really an integrator of information. So you've got the different sectors, so the finance sector, the health sector, the mobility sector. There's about 18 sectors in total. You've got departments, you have regions, these are the geographical areas. So what I'm describing is a country like Switzerland or Belgium. Then you've got the various PMCs, so these are project management consultants. Invariably, that's very big in the Middle East. It's not so big in Europe. So we call these the satellite PMOs. We have various meetings, and what you're doing is making sense between actually what the meetings are stating versus what's actually happening. You put into a war room. One of the things we actually built was a really advanced war room, which is actually totally immersive. It's not this thing here. And we also built a metaverse as well. I won't go into the details for this. So the idea is you talk to the CEO level or the sector level, and then you have insights that you're putting together for sense making, and these then go into escalations or into initiatives to actually resolve. So this is the PMO topology. And this is the service topology, the services that you actually, and the groupings of these across this lot. So they're mapped into it and they're actually delivered into projects, programs, etc. So how do you actually design this thing? So if you look at, this is on the expert course only, we offer 3 certification courses. The foundation is actually at the at the team member level, whether it's PMO or project. The practitioner is for one PMO and one PMO only, and the expert is actually designing PMO topologies. It's really just for a few people, the expert course. For the consultants, so for example, Deloitte's come on our courses, KPMG, McKinsey, and most of the consulting companies come to learn actually how to go and build these things. So this is looking at the current state assessment of what exists today, and then you actually want to build the new design. So you look at the various principles of designing, design considerations, all of these different factors down here, and there's actually more than this. You actually then look at building your design of the PMO team of PMOs in the organization. You go through the same thing as well with the PMO service topology. You pilot, you implement it. So this is looking at current state, and this is looking at then future state, and there's a feedback loop to it. So this is actually an older slide. I didn't show everything on this slide. We also have discovered 3 domains of PMOs: domain of concern, domain of influence, and the domain of control. And that actually also influences the way you design. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm sorry it was rather fast, but I only have a few minutes to go and talk about it. So open to questions now.
Thank you very much, Robert. I don't think we've got any time for questions, but we'd like to see you actually. So can you come on the screen and say hi?
I have my camera going. I do have my cameras on, so.
Okay. Maybe we can switch over then. I think the technical guys are looking at it. Yeah, we're actually 2 minutes over time, but thank you. You went very quick. I learned there was a lot of stuff on the screen. You were saying a lot of coming across with a lot of ideas. I think we should have given you twice as long actually to talk. But okay, so let's see here. Okay, there we go. Okay, say hi everybody. Hi Robert. Hi Robert.
Hi there. I'm in Switzerland, so I guess the weather where you are is probably the same weather as where I am, sort of cold and foggy.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
So the weather is not so nice here
in
Switzerland.
Well, it's brilliant in Belgium. And actually, it's fantastic.
I should be there.
These are my summer clothes. And I think we're doing well in the football as well, because it's still 0-0. We haven't lost yet, so that's good. But Morocco are 1 up, so that means Morocco are through. So don't go out in Brussels tonight, otherwise you will see them celebrating. Okay, so thank you very, very much, Robert. A big clap for Robert as well.
Thank you. I can hear a silent clap.
You were loved in Belgium now, Robert. Okay, so I'm going to introduce...
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye-bye. I'm going to introduce our next speaker.